My name is Elizabeth Rodgers, and I work at the Heart Institute Foundation in Major Gifts. Before that, I worked at United Way doing leadership giving, and prior to that, I was a student and a fundraiser at McGill. And a fun fact about me, I'm from New Jersey, but I've been in Canada for about 9 years now, so I consider myself an adopted Canadian. I'll introduce the panelists. First, we have Aine. Aine holds a doctorate in contemporary literature from the University of Toronto and has more than 8 years of grant writing experience. In her role as managing director of Framework? Okay. She oversees between 75 and 100 sponsor and grant maker relationships across Canada in an effort to fund both Timeraiser and Timeraiser Plus. And a fun fact about Aine, she has 5 sisters, and all of them have hard-to-pronounce Irish names. So welcome, Aine, which is hard to pronounce because it doesn't look like it's spelled. Next up, we have Holly. Holly has over 15 years' experience working and volunteering in the not-for-profit sector. Holly is a seasoned fundraiser and a communications professional. Prior to joining the Good Works team in April 2012, Holly managed the funds development and communications for Art Smarts, the YMCA, YWCA, Canadian Aid Society, and Girls Action Foundation. Holly co-founded the 10 Oaks Project in 2004, for which she was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award in the queer community. And fun fact about Holly, she's a mother, both by adoption and birth, of 3 children, ages 3 to 18. Welcome, Holly. Next, we have Katherine. Katherine is the administrator for the Mobile Giving Foundation Canada. She is responsible for coordinating all aspects of Canadian operations and has been for the past 3 years. Katherine has worked in telecommunications for the better part of 5 years. And fun fact about Katherine, she's an Air Force brat, 3rd generation, and has lived in a number of places across Canada. Last up is Lee. Lee is the Director, Community Knowledge, and the CKX Sherpa with Community Foundations of Canada. He also sits on the board of Imagine Canada and is the past president of the 10 Oaks Project. Fun fact about Lee, he is an Army brat and went to 9 different schools from kindergarten until he graduated high school in grade 12. So welcome, everyone. And I'll sit for the questions. Okay, is this mic on? Okay. All right. Whoa. Okay, so first question. This is for everyone. What is your connection to fundraising or philanthropy? So Aine, you want to start?
Good on the line. My connection to fundraising and philanthropy is I do a lot of fundraising. The Timeraiser program is in 17 communities across Canada, and we have relationships ranging from national financial institutions to very small individuals and local law firms. So, like many of you, the challenge of meeting the expectation of the $500 donor, which is often the same as the expectation of the $100,000 donor. So how to manage one's time and resources in relationship to that occupies a lot of my day. But yeah, that's my direct relationship.
And if anyone doesn't know Timeraiser, Google it. It's a very interesting concept.
Yeah.
Okay.
Holly?
Can you hear me? I'm not ever sure if this mic. Okay, so I'm now a fundraising consultant, and as I think Elizabeth read in my bio, I've been in the sector now for 18 years. So you look at me and I always get like, how old is this girl who's coming in to give me fundraising advice about my direct mail or my legacy program? And I have to confess, I just turned 36, which makes me feel a little bit odd about sitting on a next gen panel because how you define it, some people are like up to 35, some people are only up to 30, some people are up to 40, so I'm gonna sometimes count myself as a millennial or not a millennial. Because 78 to 80 babies, we're weird. Like, we just are a really hodgepodge. But my connection to philanthropy actually began way back in about 2003. And this is really important to me as a human being, is that I was volunteering at a summer camp at the State, and it was in the States, and it was specifically for kids of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, two-spirit, and queer parents. And I came back and I'd moved to Ottawa, and I looked around the community, and our community was really focused solely on gay men, and maybe who went to bars, essentially. And then there was the lesbians, and they were coupled, and they kind of like stayed home. But there was nothing for kids at all, and nobody was really talking about kids or where their kids were, but I knew all of these people in my networks who had children. And in Toronto, there was a huge baby boom, or a gayby boom at the time. So my wife and I started talking to other queer organizations and organizations in Ottawa saying, we really need some programming for the kids of queer families. And everybody looked at us and they laughed and they said, this is a really bad idea. This idea will go nowhere. So I think is one of the themes you heard throughout the first panel this morning. Next Gen, we really do like leadership opportunities. And if we can't find one within your organization, we're going to create them ourselves. And so at the age of 26, and my wife was 24 at the time, we co-founded a not-for-profit, and I am the last person to say the world needs another not-for-profit. I really wished it, had started a little bit differently. But the 10 Oaks Project has now been around for 10 years, and we have a broad skill set because of that. We had to learn, my first foray into fundraising was to raise $15,000 so we could have that very first summer camp way back in 2004. At the same time, I was writing policy on how not to spread communicable diseases at camp. And when the kitchen director quit 2 weeks before summer camp, I had to learn how to cook for 60 people in a professional kitchen because it just needed to get done, because this program was so important to our families and our kids. So I just, my connection to philanthropy has started there, and that has really lent me throughout my career now as a fundraising consultant a very much generalist and broad skill set, because if I don't know how to do it, we're going to figure out how to get it done, and we're going to innovate, and we're going to find new ways to meet whatever it is that you have to fundraise for.
My connection to fundraising is really through the hundreds of charities that I work with on a day-to-day basis. So in managing programs for the Mobile Giving Foundation Canada, although we are a registered charity, we're not a fundraising organization, meaning that we operate under more of a business model in that we charge for services rendered in order to support other charities in Canada and their fundraising campaigns. So part of my job is to understand the role of a fundraiser, understand what their needs are, their objectives are, their goals, so that I can help to increase the benefit of what our foundation does for those other charities.
My name is Lee. My connection to philanthropy or fundraising is, it's actually pretty serendipitous. It's a story about scrambled eggs, actually. And I was a loan representative for the United Way's campaign back in 2006. I was working for MBNA Canada, the MasterCard issuer. And I was working on the community side there, doing some fundraising and volunteering stuff, and had the opportunity to do the loan rep program. And I was standing in line, chatting up someone, waiting in line at a breakfast launch event. Those runny scrambled eggs that are kind of powdered and gross that no one really wants to eat. And I struck up a conversation with the woman, and I don't know this woman's name. And so every time, if she's in the room, every time I do philanthropy things, I'm like, if you remember this conversation we had, I was talking about the work I was doing in communications, and I was kind of tired of working for the man. And I was this dual thing where I was working for a company that was paying for me to be at the United Way, but I was feeling this existential angst about working for a big bank. And she said, well, you should check out this site called Charity Village and find out about, I know someone who's hiring a communications manager at this place called the HR Council for the nonprofit sector. You should check out the posting and do that. And I did, and I got the job. And it was this kind of, if I hadn't been standing in line behind that woman waiting for those bad scrambled eggs, maybe I would have found my way into the philanthropic sector, but so I'm forever thankful for those people that you meet serendipitously. So those connections are really important, and I'm living proof that you never know where you're going to end up based, on where you're standing in line with people. Since then, I've been working, I had the opportunity actually to work at Charity Village for a while as the editor there, and then most recently working now at Community Foundations of Canada. And I've also sat on the board of the 10 Oaks Project. Holly and I's term we ships in the night. I came on as she left, and I just finished my term there. And I think I'm an accidental fundraiser. I didn't get into it, and I was really apprehensive about asking people.
And he's
for
really naturally gifted at it.
But it's such an easy thing to do. I was when you make an ask, and it's true, people will give if you ask them. And I found it really intimidating at first, and it's been really helpful to sort of, if I can do it, anybody can do it. So that's my connection.
Great. It's good to hear everyone has a connection to fundraising philanthropy. So you're in the right place. The next question, this is for Anya and Lee. Do you think this emergent generation is different from the generations of the past? And if so, how? Anya, you want to start?
Sure. A couple of weeks ago, we, as a panel, sort of had a conversation and talked a little bit about what we were going to talk about. And I'm sure we decided which side of the question that we each were going to come down on. And I don't really remember what so I'm just going to kind of speak from my gut, and I'm sure it's going to make sense. In some ways, I think that this generation is very much like every other generation that's come before it. Young people are inherently impulsive, and they're driven by things that are happening in the moment. The difference in this generation is that they are enabled with technology that rewards impulsivity, and that has actually created a culture of impulsivity beyond just the confines of your 18 to 35-year-old sort of youthfulness. So I think it's the fact that they have the tools that perhaps lengthen the tendency of impulsivity and turn impulsivity into its own actual cultural value. And I think that that's perhaps what distinguishes them from the generation that came before. But, I don't know, there's all sorts of research that talks about how the access to quick information has actually changed the way in which the young brain orders knowledge, right? So it still kind of remains to be seen how this generation is going to shape the world because of the way that they're transforming the way knowledge is ordered within their own brains. It's pretty crazy. My partner's a neurologist, so she keeps her eye on this kind of stuff, and we have some interesting conversations about it. But yeah, Lee, I think maybe you had a slightly different take on it.
Yeah, I really sometimes get really aggravated by the sweeping generationalist generalizations that we make sometimes, and assuming that because you were born in 1980 that you fit this demographic. And I think it's more about life stage than the generation. Because I think if the boomers had Twitter when they were, a lot of things would have happened differently. So there's things about technology now that we have that weren't available then, but I think it's life stage rather than this cohort so much. And I see it with me and my brother, who's only 5 years younger than I am. I have children, I have a mortgage, I have things. He's not tied down to any of those kinds of things. So we are in a completely different space. And it's about life stage. I'm married to the bank for the next 25 years, and I have these things, and my views have I remember seeing the Maple Spring, that uprising in Quebec about the student uprising, and 10 years ago, I would have been in the streets, I would have been and now I'm just I feel myself becoming a little bit small c conservative, and it's really weird to think that I'm turning into my father. But I think it's more the life stage that I'm at rather than the generation that I fit in a way. And I just hate that kind of the notion of emerging leadership or emerging youth. I'm here, I'm fully formed, like you, and so trying to separate the two. I think there's a disservice to both sides. I think when you think about it that way. So I'm just cautious around those generalizations around the generations.
Yep, agreed. I mean, just from my own sort of familial experience, my eldest sister is 42, my youngest sister is 26. So even just within our family, there's this massive difference in the way in which the two of them communicate to each other and the way in which they receive and send out information about themselves and their lives. So again, obviously it's partly life stage, but it's also its habits, right?
Yeah.
Habits are incredibly powerful ways in which we end up behaving in relationship to the world. And so when a habit is formed around a certain relationship to information, it changes the way that people perceive you in the world, right? My eldest sister does not have those habits at all, whereas my little sister's constantly. So somewhere in between. Yeah. 79, 80 thing. Yeah.
Okay. The next question, this is going to be for Katherine and Holly. What is the hook for attracting next-gen donors and keeping them? What is the best way to make the first connection? And just a refresher, Katherine works at the Mobile Giving Foundation, and Holly's a consultant. So these two, I'm also interested in hearing what's the hook.
Okay, so you want your values worth from the consultant, so I'm pulling out the big numbers here. Okay, so one of my big personal bugaboos is I always hear about the next generation isn't giving. And so then I turn out and I say, well, can you actually overlay age on your database? So a show of hands, how many people in this room can actually overlay the age of their donors, if I were to say today? 4. Okay. So for me, I think this came again about last week when the AFP Foundation for Philanthropy, they released the results of the What Canadian Donors Want. And 7 in 10 Canadians reported making a gift to charity last year, and 6 in 10 of next generation donors. Another report came out that was commissioned by HJC and was released by Blackbaud, shows that 62% of donors in the 18 to 34 range are making gifts to your charities. So there's this big perception that the next generation is giving, and I think it's wrong because I think you're asking yourselves the wrong question. And why I'm saying is this: you should not be asking, you should be asking yourself why next generation donors are not giving to your cause. Why are they not giving to your charity if you don't think that they're there because they're there? So for the stats, here we go. 15% of all giving in Canada is made by donors in this millennial next generation cohort. And I could argue, maybe we shouldn't use a cohort, but let's just use that construct for the purposes of having this conversation. So that's $3.4 million donors in Canada, supporting 4 charities on average each year, with a $639 average value of their comprehensive giving. And if you go up all the way, it's like 800 and something for Gen X, and then it's a little close to 1,000 for the boomers, and then it's a little about 1,500 for the civics. So yes, it's a lot less, but $639 from a donor is fantastic. So for me, the 2 pillars around millennial engagement are really these. So the first is look at your organization, and this is really a tip for managers, directors, and CEOs. Look at your staff team. What does your age complement look like on your own staff team? Who are your next generation people that you want to target as part of your donors? Who are in positions of leadership already, and who are you grooming to be your next stage leaders? When millennials are looking for places to work, they're looking for work-life balance. They're looking for flexibility. They want a workplace culture that emphasizes community, teamwork, and collaboration. They value transparency. They want competitive pay and job opportunities. And the more digitally inclined, so if they're working in that social media universe, the more tendency they want to work in a flat structure as opposed to a hierarchy. You'll see that Gen Y is more multicultural, more internationalist in outlook, and they're more socially tolerant than older cohorts. So my point here is that if you're not able to attract and retain next generation talent within your organization, then those values are not permeating, the values that the next generation truly value. They're not permeating into how you talk about your charity, how you execute on delivering your social work and your mission. They're not talking about in the ways that not permeating into the ways that you engage your volunteers. They're not permeating into the way you fundraise for your cause. So look at your organization because you need to have them, next geners, as part of your staff team if you really want to tap into this this sort of complement. And the second pillar is one that we'll talk about over and over, but millennial donors aren't really different from any other donor. They just have, their priorities are different in terms of their prominence. We're going to talk a little bit about actual behaviors and channels later, but the values. So when millennials choose where we want our dollars to go, they favor organizations where there's considerable engagement. So we want to see results. It's not enough for you to tell me that you're doing great work and you make a difference. I actually need to know what that difference is. Take your messaging a little bit further. We've already talked a lot about how they want to get involved. They want to be part of your board's leadership. They want real opportunities. And for them, engagement is not just about giving. It's getting involved in other ways. And they're also way more selective. I think this is really important, that they give to 50% fewer causes than civics. So a millennial donor will give to an average of 4 organizations over a year, while a civic donor will give to an average of 8. They tend to favor human rights, international development, and children's charities. So if you're in those sectors, this is a donor group that is probably ripe for you to start targeting. And so I'll leave it there, otherwise we'll go on forever.
Katherine? That's great. Holly, actually, everything you said kind of leads into what I was going to focus on. And talking about organizations looking at their own staff and seeing if the next gen are represented among their own staff is very important, because how are you going to understand that group if you're not working with that group already? And so my answer to the question is more to directly answer the question of what is the hook. So when thinking of a response to this, I thought, well, the hook is kind of 3-pronged in that it's about impact, it's about relevance, and it's about value. So that is the hook. They want to know the difference. They want to see that impact. it needs to be relevant to what they care about and what's important to them. So understanding that, having worked with NextGen itself makes it a lot easier to go further. And value is really important. Thinking of altruistic behavior, well, is anything really truly altruistic if we're doing it because it makes us feel good? So there is a return. There's always a return on everything we do, and even if that's just to feel good, that's value. So offering a proposition to potential donors, supporters, and engagement, or asking just for funds is really about what's the return for them. And so clearly communicating that to them will help prompt more action.
Perfect. Okay, the next question is going to be for everyone and a bit short and sweet with answers. How do NextGen like to give and be thanked?
The Timeraiser program, just for those of you in the room who are not familiar with it, we invite people to come and bid their volunteer hours on artwork that's in the room. So they come in and they meet with a whole bunch of different nonprofits. They hear about what kind of volunteer opportunities are available, and then they start bidding their hours in 5-hour increments, up to 100 hours. They've got a year to do their volunteer pledge, at the end of which they get their artwork. They take it home as a sign of their goodwill. Most people stay engaged beyond the life of their pledge. So I would say that we need to sort of turn on its head the idea of giving and what a resource is. If you're, Holly, there's really interesting numbers around financial contributions, but there is this other major contribution of time and talent that is in addition to treasure that I think marks a real available pool of resources that we need to be able to tap on. Everybody up here has spoken about engaging them in the right way and providing them those leadership opportunities. What we're doing is incentivizing those leadership opportunities and those volunteer roles, with artwork. But I think that's indicative of a way that they like to be engaged. It's in something that's new, that's interesting, that feels as though it's got multiple levels of good, right? We pay the artists for the work, so they feel as though, okay, I'm doing something where there's something good for artists, I'm doing something where it's good for the nonprofit, I'm doing something that's good for me too, right? So that sense of kind of a triple bottom line, I think, is really important. Yeah.
So we had talked about talking about personal sort of examples. So eliminating everybody I donate to because I want to see how you're doing your solicitations and stewardship. So let's just cross those off my list. There's a couple of organizations that I give to religiously, whether I'm a monthly donor or give large gifts, a couple of times a year to, and that's because I've been personally engaged, connected, or involved. So the 10 Oaks Project is one of them. Outward Bound, because I took a canoe trip when I was at the end of university, and I learned my outdoor skills from that, and I want to climb Kilimanjaro in 2017, putting it out there so you could hold me to it. And so I want to give to them because I want to be involved in that organization. And I give to one international organization, which is SOS Children's Villages, and I learned about them because they happen to be a client of ours at GoodWorks, and I really like how they do their work. They give orphans a permanent, loving home and family. But where it actually resonated, which you'll never find on a database, is a group overshare. But when my wife and I decided to conceive our youngest, we used a known donor, and he's Sri Lankan. And so we're two white women raising a mixed-race baby, and we wanted that baby to somehow start building cultural connections because he lives in Toronto. So because we could sponsor children anywhere in the world, we specifically picked a child who lives in Jaffna because he's Tamil, so we could start building that connection, and our child could learn about the other part of her heritage. I give a lot of $25, kind of one-time gifts to people who ask me for money, and so, there's a crowd fundraising there, and we'll talk a lot about that peer-to-peer, but that's huge. Our social networks are huge. It's one of the things you can tap into the next generation. But you'll get a lot of small donations from that. And the one organization that I give to that I've never been involved with personally and just absolutely love, and I would recommend, even if you're Canadian, to give to them today, is Mercy Corps. So you can see what they're doing. And you won't get any of their direct mail stuff. You'll just get their email program. But I am a monthly donor, and I get an email every month talking very specifically and very concretely about the good that my $10 a month donation is making. And I love that, because when we talk about the next gen, they want to be very specific. I don't want to know that I'm saving children's life. Tell me about one child. Tell me about their story. Tell me about the difference that my donation made very specifically to that kid. And that's meaningful to me as a donor because I feel really involved in your work.
I'm going to go along the personal lines as well, and thinking about myself, I do fall into that 18 to 34-year range. I'm also a highly introverted individual, so my answer to this question would be autonomously. That's how they like to give, on their own decision, on their own making. And there's kind of an analogy that I use in comparison to a relationship or a courtship, is that I want to go on a first date, but I don't want to commit to marriage right away. You know, I'm okay giving you a little bit or giving a little bit of time, but not all of it, not all at once. And to Holly's point, show me that specific impact. Don't tell me that children are going to be saved. One example of one of the charities that I work with that runs a mobile giving program is the Breakfast Club of Canada. They're able to equate a $5 text message donation to breakfast for 5 days for one child. That, to me, I will always give to Breakfast Club of Canada, because I know that very specific impact that I am making by just a simple $5 donation. You know, another thing that I was thinking about in terms of recognition and how to give thanks is, again, to Holly's point, the Mobile Giving Foundation has done consumer attitude surveys, and for 2 years in a row, the biggest thing that donors wanted was a report on how donations are being used, on that impact. That's what they want. That's the thanks to them. So I think that that's really important and really key to understand, is that it should be specific, concrete, and quantifiable.
For me personally, I'm a Timeraiser alum, so successful Timeraiser winner, and my artwork is proudly hanging in my front entrance, so every time I see it, it's like a reminder of that program. And for me, there's something about the collective experience, like being a part of something that's bigger than you. It's like going to a playoff hockey game, and there's a collective ooh and ah, you know, and you're just sort of immersed in this collective experience that's bigger than you, and it's sort of, and hockey is not the best example, but Timeraiser or other things like that, where you're a part of something that's bigger than just you. That, to me, personally, is a great thing, where I'm contributing to something and I know that there's a big piece. So if there's any of those kinds of collective experiences, like even the crowd fundraising or the other things like that. And I'm a sucker for a good story. You know, and that impact. And I think also having kids too, I sort of tend to think about those things and have reflected, and I see my own children and the things that we're trying to do, and it's amazing. And there's, maybe I'll save it for the second question, but on the story piece, I'll let you answer tips. But okay, sorry, I set it up. I have to say it now. But being the chair of the 10X project, one of the best things I did there was being the bus chaperone for one of our programs. So I would check the list of participants as they got onto the bus for Project Acorn, which is our youth leadership retreat. And we were missing a participant who had signed up but didn't show up. So I sent him a text message. He's like, "Lee, I don't have the money." And it's offered on a sliding scale. So the program is completely, no one is turned away based on ability to pay. And I was like, listen, don't worry about the money. Just like, and he'd committed to paying $10. This is a kid who had been kicked out of his house because he was LGBTQ, was living at the Young Men's Shelter here in Ottawa. And I'm like, don't worry about the money. Like 20 minutes, get yourself together and get on the bus. He goes to program. From what I could tell, in and out of program, has an amazing time. Christmas, we're waiting for funding from the Trillium Foundation. I'm waiting for a check to come in so I can deposit it before the end of our fiscal year. And anyone who works at a charity knows the importance of the dates the checks get deposited. I'm going to the office every day between Christmas and New Year's waiting for the check for the Trillium Foundation. And on the 30th of December, there were 2 envelopes. There was the check from Trillium, and there was an envelope with $10 from that participant who came in. And that $10, I was like, I deposited it, and I was so proud and so happy about the impact of the program that this kid actually came up and said, this is the impact of the program. So like that's the story I tell about 10 Oaks, and that to me, like I know that kid and I know that he's doing great stuff in the community now, and it's, you know, a text message that I had, like, just show up, just come to the program, you know, and $10.
Well, I have chills from that story, so.
Anyway, sorry.
Okay, so we are a little short for time, so we're going to skip the next question and go to specifics. So this is for everyone. Steps to implement immediately. What are 2 steps fundraisers in this room can take right now to better engage next gen?
And this is where we have to be brief?
Brevity is great.
Okay. Okay.
2 steps.
2 steps. Simplify the content on your website. Probably
Great stuff.
60% of it doesn't need to be there. the Timeraiser Plus program, it's the other part of our work, and it's helping nonprofits with digital skills and competencies. So we've done about 150 web audits in the last 6 months, and I can tell you that is the #1 problem: too much information. The second most pressing, glaring problem is that there's no funnels, there's no paths. So when you arrive on the website, there's no sense of, I am this, so this is the direction I'm going to take through your content. I am that, this is the direction I'm going to take through your content. Donor, volunteer.
Right.
If you have some time, check out the Canadian Cancer Society's website. There's some great things about everybody's website, but this thing in particular, right away, it asks you to choose from 3 different buttons, whether you want to volunteer, whether you want to donate, whether you just want to know, or whether you have cancer. And based on your selection, all of a sudden the content is now generated to help you. The other thing they do really well is say, I want to volunteer. I have 5 minutes, I have 15 minutes, I have 10 hours, I have my whole life. And so then it presents you specific opportunities based on that. So curate the content, get rid of most of it, and create specific paths on your web infrastructure that people can take. Those would be, top 2. Yeah.
Perfect. Holly?
2, eh? All right. So I'm gonna help build a case because a lot of the giving habits between your millennial or Gen Y donors are very similar to Gen X, and if you know, Gen X is the #2 giver in Canada now. They actually give now more than civics, behind boomers. And so this is where I think you would get the most bang from your buck. So not only it's about a website, it's about a responsive website. And so you have to Google responsive design if you don't know what it is, because I'm not allowed to talk about it here. But this
It fits on your phone.
Yeah, so there you go. But it's a little bit more than that because it's the whole thinking process.
That's all I know
But
about
okay.
it.
So anyways, what we know is that over 65% of donors will visit your website before making a gift. 90% of your major donors do. 90%. And of the millennial generation that comes up, they say 40% of them go to your website to find more information about your charity, but which leads me to the other question, which I think it was Tuan who said in the last session about making it kind of searchable, but 30% will Google some sort of random string and stumble upon your charity, so don't make it random. You want to invest in a solid inbound marketing. So you want to look at your search engine optimization, you want to use a Google AdWords account. As a charity, you get $10,000 a month in free advertising if you sign up for it. Why are you not using AdWords to direct traffic to your website? I don't get it. And then the second one is, there's 3. So a solid email program,
cheating,
because I know, there's so many. But this is the way that this generation gives. They don't necessarily, this totally takes back to everything. Okay, the way that we used to segment our donor giving habits by channels doesn't work anymore. There's no way in an environment where you have multi-channel attribution that you can know whether that phone call, whether that face-to-face on the street interaction, whether their participation in your social media group on Facebook, which is the actual touch point or the trigger that turned them into be a donor. And if you actually can track it, which we have done for clients, it's crazy to see where the actual conversion happens along that journey. So having a solid email program is one of the key ways that people get information and interact with you. And then because you sat in this room and you didn't go into the other room about crowdfunding or peer-to-peer campaigns, that's also the #1 way that millennial donors engage their own network. So you want to look at using those tools like GiveEffect, Indiegogo. You can use an Artez or an AKA Raisin to do that.
Holly stole one of mine. My first one was apply for Google Grants AdWords. I came across this about a year ago, and I could not be happier. The click-through rates are fantastic. It really improves your presence and your website. Google Grants AdWords. Really easy to apply, really quick.
It's $120,000 in free marketing money, more than what most of us have in a year in cash to work with. So like,
now if only Facebook could implement the same kind of thing, we'd be all set. So one of the second things that I was thinking of starting right away would be a YouTube channel. Canadians love videos. We love watching videos. It can be really easy to create even just a webcam interview. If you think of interviewing people that you've helped, you want to put this up on your YouTube channel, share it with all of your followers. Now you're showing impact in a visual way. Nobody has to read through any lengthy newsletter. They get to watch it firsthand. So starting up your own YouTube channel, of course planning it beforehand would be suggested. But and use more images. Less words, more images. we can create the rest of the stories in our heads as long as you have something powerful to show people.
I'll be brief. I think one is, again, a sucker for a good story. So how can you, and then like the idea of the video or using other things and being true to your organization's brand to like live the values. At 10 Oaks, we did summer camp things. So we did a fundraising video where I sang camp songs with campers, and that's, I wore T-shirts and we did an interview at someone's house and did that kind of stuff. So just don't be afraid to have fun with this stuff too, because I think that there's a lot of stuff that we get bombarded with, and especially with Google Mail now separating all my email and doing everything for me. Like, how are you going to stand out in a way? And I think if you can just build that real connection with your donor, tell the story, and like have fun with it, I think you'll be really successful.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. We have, let's see, 7 minutes for Q&A. Is there any audience members who have questions? There's a mic in the back. Perfect.
Hi, this is more directed, I guess, to Holly because of where you work, though, too. Just capturing on that message about fewer words, more stories, but fewer words, without reducing the impact of a story. How does that affect your direct mail?
Well, what I think, so one of the best strategies that an organization develops is what we would call as a content creation strategy. So take the story that Lee just told you about the 10 Oaks and the kid and the $10. You need to take that story and adapt it for every medium that you're doing. So actually one of my points here is that 56% of millennial donors actually like to get information about charity in the mail, but actually only 13% do. So what's really funny is they're not on your mailing lists, but it represents a niche market. Because let me just do a litmus test here of people who are under 35 in the room. How cool would it be for you to get a piece in the mail that actually spoke to you and wasn't really one of those 4-page long letters that really appeal to the 80-year-old donor? I would love it. So I would love it as a consultant sometime if somebody would hire us to do some of that work, but until they do, I unfortunately can't do it. But, so my point is that you take that message and you need to adapt it for your medium. So when you're looking at telling a story through a picture, there's various characteristics that you need to do it. When you do it on video, you're looking for a little something different. If you need to post that on your Pinterest page, again, it looks different. When it's copy on your website, there's a whole bunch of characteristics you want to look and write for, and then again, same if you put it on your blog. So my whole thing is that a lot of organizations between their communications and programs have a hard time finding stories and mining them. And one of the biggest barriers is you don't need to have 15 stories. You probably maybe need to find 3 or 4 and work it for the year. So don't stress yourself out, but find 3 or 4 incredible goosebump stories and then adapt them for the medium that they're going on.
Any other questions? Oh, we have 2 people lined up, so first we'll take yours.
I'd like to comment on 2 sort of social issues. I work for a faith-based policy shop that deals with political policy. So
religion and politics?
Yeah, we're just going to throw sex in there and have, all 3 things you're not supposed to talk about at a party.
Yeah.
So our particular challenge is we come from a faith-based perspective, commenting on political policy making. So in terms of engaging the youth, I remember from my student politic days in the 80s, politics was front and parcel, but being faith-based was not. And as current studies show that youth are falling away from organized religion, that's my next generation target of people who are not involved in faith-based organizations. So any particular insights on that, I'd appreciate it.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a lapsed Catholic, super politically engaged person. So I don't know. I think it's go where you, like for me, like what's the cause, right? And what's the way to that cause in a way? Like, so for me, the religious side, and this is maybe an overshare, but like that's less important to me now than the political. So if there's a way to sort of, live those values in a way, but focus on the stuff that might draw, my attention would be sort of the political issue versus that, unless they're 2 separate issues, like, can you separate them completely? I don't know what the issues are without knowing what the organization is.
Our commentary comes from a political perspective, but our primary focus is commenting on social justice or political justice, all issues. So
I think there's relevance to that regardless of the religious side, right? Like I think social justice is an angle that we're all, that I'm not going to speak for the whole panel, but that I find really important and valuable. So targeting that, and then if it aligns with the religious thing, well, that's fine, but it might be incidental to me, but it's not going to turn me away, maybe.
I would say invest in some really great design. Fast Company today just tweeted this link to this guy who's designed these minimalist posters based on the Bible. It's the most beautiful design you've ever seen. And it's super like high modernist, minimalist interpretations of very specific scriptural passages, right? So it's like this beautiful image of a whale and then a tiny blue dot in the middle, and it's Jonah and the whale, right? So, these kinds of ways where like people love something that looks beautiful, right? And they're selling these posters, and like lapsed Catholic would never think of hanging a psalm on my wall, but I'm like, I want one of these posters because they're so beautiful. So starting the conversation through, something that looks beautiful and is pleasurable to use is really effective.
That's actually, I just want to add, Urban Ministries of Durham, UMD, they're a stateside organization, religious, and they do a lot of homeless programs. You should check out their Empty Bowls campaign, which was a huge online social media campaign, and it's crazy how you can go in, you can tailor a poster. So a whole bunch of people who were into design thinking but weren't into the cause got into it that way. But the fundamental issue you have is you need to find who and identify who your base is, regardless of their age and what their core values are.
Question over there?
I'm wondering if you see a difference in giving along gender lines.
From our perspective, we're dealing in volunteer hours, so we have more women than men, but that's not inconsistent with general trends across the sector. So yeah, that's all I can say to speak to that. Holly, you probably have better data.
I don't. They haven't sliced it and diced it that way. I don't.
I can speak to stats from consumer attitude surveys that we've done on those who have donated through text message. The majority are women, but again, along the same lines as other.
And are the causes different, or you haven't mind that?
I know they have sliced and diced it that way. The women causes are the children, education. I've read a study on this.
Yeah, but across generally speaking, so Next Gen want to be touched by organizations that have a personal touch point or a connection with, right? So let's think of an issue, because Cynthia, you spoke up about mental health. That's a really challenging issue to engage next generation in, but then in our community we had a bunch of youth suicides, which really changed that conversation. So there was an alignment between uncanny partners. But most next geners have not yet had a touch point with the healthcare system, so they're not going to be giving to the local hospital. They're not going to be until they're stuck in that kind of sandwich generation and their mother or grandparent get that palliative care, or they have kids themselves who get health care. So it becomes a very interesting, but it's children's organizations. Yeah. International development is huge, and that's where a really huge niche is to cultivate that generation of donor and then bring them through the rest of their lifetime.
I work at the Heart Institute, and the next generation is not our demographic. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
But this is great conversation for me. When you walk around the Heart Institute, you're not going to see many people under 50.
But if you could just sometimes you have to kind of flip that mode of thinking on its head. Like we're working with the Arthritis Society right now, and one of the things that they're talking about is how do they engage the millennial generation is arthritis. It's not like a really 25 to 34-year-old sort of thing. I mean, it is, from the caretaker's perspective, you're absolutely right, and there are millions of people who have arthritis who are not in your sort of older age. But for them, we were like, okay, well, some of the things about arthritis are that it's one of sitting is the new smoking, right? There's all sorts of things that you can do for preventative in terms of preventative measures. So why not a little plug-in that's their little blue arthritis bird that every hour flies across the screen and reminds you to stand up and stretch, right? So now it's okay, so now you're talking to somebody who's 25 and 30 and they're thinking about arthritis, right? So it's what are the things now that you put yourself in front of somebody who's not necessarily caring about your cause, but probably will in the long run, yeah.
That comes back to it being relevant, right? So taking your cause, looking at the individual, how can our cause be relevant to this individual in this stage of their life doing what they are doing?
It's nudge. It's about nudging.
It's a nudge,
It's a
right?
nudge.
So the preventative measures, I wish more health-focused organizations focus on that in engaging with the next gen. I don't care right now about how you're going to help somebody who's 70 or 80 or 90, but how can you help me prevent me from being in that scenario 30, 40, 50 years down the road? And that's what would engage me.
All right, well, we don't have any more time for questions. I hope everyone took a little nugget out of this. And I want to thank our panelists. We have a little donation here for your charity of choice, so thank you for being with us. And if we can give them a round of applause, thank you for everything.